Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and welcome back to the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, wherever you are joining us from in the world. And if it's your first time with us today, let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Titterington, and together with Stephen Sacker, we will be guiding you through this afternoon's deliberations on the renewal of the food and agriculture system, and in particular in this first panel session, looking at how we deliver healthy food for all at scale. Now, coming back from the lunch break here in Central Europe, we want to refresh and stimulate your minds for the afternoon session. And so before I hand over to Stephen to guide us through, we want to share with you a summary of, a video summary of a hackathon that was organized by Rabobank, supported by the Forum and the United Nations and Young Friends of the Countryside, with a group of next generation leaders from all across the world. They were charged with coming up with innovative ideas on how to renew the food system in a way which was good for diets and good for the planet. So let me take just a few minutes of your time to share with you a video summary of what that group of people came up with.
First of all, thank you so much for joining us here tonight or this morning or this evening, depending on where you are, because we're with such an international group tonight.
I'm Juliana. I'm from Brazil. I'm 17 years old and I love to read.
I'm Albi. I'm from the UK and I play the keyboard in a band.
My name is Ivana. I love eating healthy food, and that's why I find this topic personally interesting.
We talk about restaurants, industry, and so on, reducing food waste as such.
So eat more local, more plant-based, more fresh.
Plus, you're not wasting any produce when it's perfectly fine and could be consumed by people who don't really care what it looks like.
It would be useful to establish more zero-waste shops where food would be sold without packaging.
Increase awareness, for example, have more talks at school. They should be aware of what they should eat more of and less of in order to have a good health.
Yeah, you could also do a meat tax for like the meats that have a large emission of carbon dioxide. You could, increase the price on that.
A lot of it goes back to the love of the land, the environment, the love of Mother Nature, and the love of producing food. And we need to have an approach where people get on and that people are working together rather than working against. I believe that farmers really do care about the environment. They do care about the welfare of their animals. That's why they do it. It's not an easy job.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those were some of the voices, including some very, very good ideas from young people involved in this hackathon. Now, I have to confess, I didn't actually know what a hackathon was until it was explained to me, but they put their collective brains together to come up with some solutions for how to deliver healthy food across the world at scale, which is, of course, the theme of this particular session I'm about to introduce you to. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the hackathon at the first point we can in the panel discussion. But the most important thing I need to do right now is build upon the video by introducing you to our terrific panel members. Now, panel members, I know you're all standing by with your cameras and your laptops and your phones. So when I introduce you, give a little wave to the camera so we all know exactly who each of you is. And in no particular order, let me introduce Brent Loken, who is Global Food Lead Scientist at WWF, Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of GAIN, that is the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, Schengen Fan, who is Chair, Professor and Dean at the Academy of Global Food Economics and Policy at the China Agricultural University, Berry Martin, who is a member of the executive board of Rabobank, who of course were the sponsors of that hackathon we just learned a little bit about. Finally, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who should be on our panel, but for reasons which I'll go into in just a moment, cannot be. That is Metin Yuman, who represents indigenous people. She's an activist with indigenous communities in the Youth Caucus, an executive member of the Myanmar Indigenous Peoples Network. Now, unfortunately, Metin Yuman cannot be with us because I have to confess this morning she has undergone a very difficult situation at home in Myanmar. We, of course, all are aware of the military takeover in Myanmar, the very difficult situation people on the ground face there. I'm sad to say that Metin had some problems connected with that very difficult situation in Myanmar this morning. She is not able to join us with her video link. We wanted you to know that, and we wanted you to see her, but sadly we cannot hear from her, and I deeply regret that. But there we are. I'm afraid there is nothing we can do. Anyway, panel members, I do want to begin by just picking up on some of the themes that were touched upon in the video about this really fun hackathon that got young people thinking about healthy food and how to deliver it across the world. If I may, I'm going to start with Berry. Berry Martin, you are an executive board member at Rabobank. This is your baby to a certain extent. You explain to me why this hackathon was important to you and what you learned from it.
Well, thank you. Look, the hackathon was important because we were looking at input from another sectors, not the usual suspects on the food summit. So we organized those hackathons around the world. We invited youngsters and they came up with ideas. They debated the issues around food. Really, what impressed me is about how committed the young are to solving it. They all see that food is their future and they need to solve it also for their planet. So that we had heated debates and also amongst them, and what's right, what is wrong, is animal protein the right thing? What is waste? Should we all go vegetarian? I thought it was a great discussion and a great debate. And I'm really impressed about actually how committed they are, but also, and I think that's one of the big roles that we have, is how actually they are seeking for the right information. I think they also are looking at what is right, what is wrong, what is myth, and what is really impacting the planet, and what's the right food. So I think we have a big role there. And as you see, what won at the end, the hackathon, I was on the jury and the panel, what won was this idea of the ugly food and using technology to be able to distribute ugly food to restaurants, and so that restaurants could, especially vegetables, could market that they are actually using in their recipes food waste and ugly foods, but still of an excellent quality. And that for a lot of young and a lot of informed people would go to that restaurant because of this special food. I was really impressed. Maybe it's not the most innovative idea that they are coming, but for me, it's their worry about food waste, about new ways, new distribution, new channels that really caught us. And it's easily implementable.
Yeah.
Thank you. Back to you.
Let's hear it for ugly food, I say. But I just want to ask you something, and I don't mean to be rude, Brent, but you and me, we're of a certain age. Nobody could pretend that we're youthful anymore, but you've just been working with these young people on this project. I'm wondering whether you see any clear distinction between the thinking on these food issues of the new young generation of young adults and people like you and me who are more into middle age. Is there a generational difference in the way people see these food issues, do you think? From the look of Brent, he's definitely not hearing me at this very minute.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was me or okay, yes. Yeah, I would say there's an absolute generational issue. And when we look at kids, and I worked with kids for many years, one of the things that I found is just like their influence of technology and what they're bringing to the table. And, sometimes I even look at my own kids and their ability to be able to pick up on the tech and, some of these solutions. They think about this in such a different way. So I think there's an absolute generational aspect to this, and when I was watching the video, one of the things that I noticed is that, it just had me smiling and brought joy to my face to see young people getting involved in one of the most important issues that we could actually be talking about, because food is going to impact young kids going, into the future. They're one of the most important groups, and they are largely affected by this. And, one of the things that we're seeing is that marketing campaigns are actually targeting youth. and they're marketing junk food to youth. And that's one of the things that, it's really good to see youth push back and say enough is enough, that we don't want this kind of food actually pushed on us anymore. We want healthy food choices. So it's very exciting to see this, and I look forward to actually supporting it and actually growing the youth movement.
Yeah, I would certainly support that notion. Schengen Fang, I want to bring you into this because, interestingly, obviously you come from a country of more than 1 billion people. We didn't hear from a young person in China in the course of the hackathon video, but I just wonder whether you feel that young people in China are now very heavily engaged in this discussion about, where food comes from, food production systems, sustainability, and consumption patterns. Are Chinese youth engaging in this?
Well, I have to confess that I have not watched the video. I hope some of the young people did come from China, India, or Africa, and I don't know how young they are, whether in their 20s or teenagers or school children. But I must tell you that the youth in developing countries, Africa, Bangladesh, India, China, are facing a different situation. I think many of them are still hungry. Many of them still do not have access to healthy and nutritious foods. I think this is a top priority. So they are aspired. For example, the young people in Ethiopia, I used to work for IPRI for many years. They are really inspired and aspired by many to do better work, to improve their technology, their business practices, to use modern inputs to produce more for them and for others. So I think the youth from different parts of the world have different problems, different challenges they need to solve. Now, coming back to China, China obviously has probably one of the largest group of the youth in the world. And they, on the one hand, let's say they have grown up with modern technologies. Almost every one of them has a cell phone, and they watch videos, this so-called small movies and so on. They're heavily influenced by others, by celebrities, by their peer. I think I see a great opportunity for us to influence young people to engage something positive, particularly to promote more healthy, nutritious, and sustainable diets. I think some of the young people in my university definitely know that. They begin to reduce the food waste and food loss. They begin to look at the nutrition. They begin to look at some social problem, particularly the climate change and unsustainable food production. So once again, I have to say that I have not watched the movie, the video. I just let you know that the young people here in China are equally committed to do something different. But more can be done.
Yeah, Schengen Fan, that's terrific. That's a really interesting input. And as you rightly say, people have different perspectives depending on the context of the country from which they are looking at this whole issue of healthy food and food sustainability and getting it to the people across the world who, as you say, in many parts of the world do remain hungry. And in that context, I want to bring Lawrence Haddad in. Now, Lawrence, your organization is called the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. So I'd like your take on this discussion about where young people are at in terms of their awareness of these issues around food systems and around food equity, and whether you see a sort of geographical divide between rich world and poorer world.
Thanks, Stephen. I think the issues of youth are pretty universal. Yes, it is different in different contexts. But one of my favorite GAIN programs is a program in Bangladesh, which we started out calling the Pocket Money Pledge. And these are Bangladeshi adolescents who come from poor families. But when they go to school, they have maybe 5 cents a day to spend on food around the school. And they are constrained to spend it on junk food because that's the only thing that's available outside of their school. So working with one of the youth organizations in Bangladesh, we developed with the youth, and we supported the youth to develop a Nourishing Dreams pledge, where they said They said, we will buy nutritious foods if you, government, and you, businesses, make them available to us. And over 1 million adolescents in Bangladesh signed that pledge and really got the attention of governments. Adolescents are future voters. Really got the attention of businesses. Adolescents are future consumers for life. And it's making a difference. And now the same model is being adopted by the UN Food System Summit that I'm and all of us actually are working on in one way or another. And we're hoping to get 1 million signatures globally by the September summit and 100 million by 2025. So I think youth individually and collectively are very powerful agents of change, not only in the future, but today.
Thanks, Lawrence. And even as you're talking, I'm very aware that the picture under you in our multi-screen here of all the speakers is of Maitin Yuman in, well, she's not in Myanmar in that picture, but she was supposed to be joining us. I'm just going to remind you one more time, supposed to be joining us from Myanmar. Sadly, she cannot for reasons which are far beyond her control. She was going to talk about the perspective of indigenous peoples when it comes to food production, delivering healthy food at scale, as seen from parts of the world where indigenous agricultural practices are still extremely important to consider as a part of this calculation. She can't be with us, and I wish she could, but I just wanted to remind everybody again that she was very much an integral part of our panel planning. I also want to remind you at this point that you can join this conversation. All you need to do is either go onto the questions area on the platform that you're all watching this, or you can join us at hashtag, or you can put a question to us at hashtag FFA2021 on Twitter, and I guarantee you that we will see any question you put on with that hashtag, and they will be fed to me. So do that, because the more questions we get from you guys, the more intelligent and engaging discussion we will have. Now, I want to go back to our panel, and I want to reflect panel on things that we've heard through the course of the day. From the very beginning, when we had a letter of welcome from the Secretary General of the UN, then we heard from the Director General of the World of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, we've had an emphasis on the fact that, you know, right across the world, there are at least 800 million people right now who are still living with the day-to-day reality of hunger. This discussion for the next hour or so is all about healthy food delivered at scale around the world. So I want each of you to explain to me where the word healthy fits into that. Does the main priority have to be getting food to these people to fill their bellies, to make sure that they are no longer going hungry, rather than worrying too much about it being sort of maximum sort of health benefit and sustainability? Or do we have to consider everything all at once? It isn't just about urgent getting of food to people, it's the kind of food we get to people. Where's the balance of priorities within that overall equation? Let me start, Brent, you're at the top of the screen looking quizzical, so let me start with you.
Yeah, well, you know, Stephen, this is a pretty important point that I think that we need to start wrestling with, because historically we've decoupled health and environmental concerns and we put them into two different silos. And that hasn't worked, you know, and what we're seeing is that by tackling one issue, we could actually aggravate the other issue. So I think that anywhere that we tackle these concerns, we have to make sure that the health and the environment are at the table and being discussed at the same time. You know, because what we could potentially end up doing is going into some area, solving the health crisis. We could aggravate the, you know, environmental concerns, which could over the long term have health, you know, impacts. You know, and unfortunately, many of these conversations remain siloed. You know, we've got the health ministers, you know, talking about health impacts. We've got environment ministers talking about the environment, and we have to figure out how we start. However, we also have to realize and meet people where they are, because I think that in many of these countries, people aren't concerned about, you know, they're not concerned about biodiversity loss. They're not really concerned about, you know, something like climate change, which is some far off thing. They are concerned about health, you know. So I think bringing health issues, economic issues to the front of the table and actually addressing those up front first, coupling them with, you know, environmental concerns is going to have to be the way to go.
Yeah, Barry, you speak as you know, a financier, a banker, a capitalist, if I can put it that way. So what's your take on this? When you're considering this from your sort of banking perspective, what do you regard as the priorities when it comes to analyzing the way food systems work?
Well, the first thing, and thank you for the question, the first thing is that there is no solution that fits all. Let's be very honest, if you are in the Midwest of the US, it's completely different, the solution in relation to biodiversity, health, and sustainable production and what to produce. If you are in Ethiopia, as Lawrence said, or in Bangladesh, the solution is completely different. So let's first be aware that there is no one thing that fits all. So for me, what I'm looking at is as a Rabobank, is partnerships to have the right intervention and the right solution in every place that we are operating. So that for me is a very important thing. So we also have organized ourselves in that way so that we can supply or deliver products specifically to smallholder farmers in certain regions, or to large farmers in other regions, or mid-sized farmers in other regions, or supply chains or value chains. So for me, that's a very important concept. As a banker, what you're really looking at is that the supply chain is organized in such a way that it is a robust supply chain. Because where you lose money is actually on the weakest link in that supply chain. So for me, what we should do in partnerships with governments and with all in the food summit is that we agree how do we come together in the framework on these different supply chains. And one solution is not the same. And we have seen that now there's a big discussion of it's not going about only nutrition, but also the pricing of carbon in the value chain. And the solution for a smallholder farmer, how you do that, is completely different than the carbon sequestration that you might look at in the Midwest of the US. So for me, yes, it's about robust value chains, responsible also people coming together and looking at what's the right solution for each region. And it's not one size fits all.
Now, you guys may not have heard it, but in an earlier panel, we had a radical proposal from one panelist suggesting that the big corporations who are dominant in the, as she put it, industrialized meat sector, essentially should be seen like the big coal, big oil companies, and that ultimately they really have no future, and that in 10 or 20 years' time, industrialized meat production will no longer be acceptable. So when we start talking about the distribution of healthy food around the world so that people are fed and are fed with healthy, nutritious food, do we need to start talking about action, both private enterprise and perhaps more importantly governmental, to phase out entire sectors of the food system business? Lawrence, have a go at that one.
Yeah, nice easy question, Stephen. Thank you for that. I think for your bigger question, I think the food system we have today was largely designed in the 1980s. And I think it was largely designed to try to end hunger. And actually, it hasn't done that, but it's reduced hunger a lot. If you look at the numbers in the 1980s compared to where they are now, they're actually at about 690 million right now. But they're going up. So the design has worn its welcome out with regards to hunger. And even more importantly, the design from the 80s is generating massive greenhouse gas emissions, reducing biodiversity, and pumping, increasing obesity levels dramatically. So our food systems now are well past their sell-by date, and we have to redesign them. And by redesigning them, it's not just governments. It's not just businesses, it's not just civil society, it's all of those groups have to change. But governments have to be in the lead. Government action is not a cure-all, but government inaction is certainly a kill-all. We won't get anything done without government action. And governments are very timid when it comes to shaping food systems for the current realities. For example, the price subsidies, the ag price subsidies, what is subsidized, the production that is subsidized, is not stuff that we would like to see subsidized. I would like to see fruits and vegetables and pulses and nuts and fish and dairy and eggs, these kinds of foods that are really rich in nutrients, whole grains, they're not subsidized. Agricultural R&D is targeted towards the big grains. Not enough goes to high value crops that are good for you and good for the planet. And consumer incentives are not they're not targeted enough to good, healthy, sustainable outcomes. Yes, we have sugar taxes and they are helpful. Yes, we do have some curbs on marketing of unhealthy foods, but unhealthy foods are everywhere. There was a study a couple of years ago that showed of the 22 biggest food and beverage companies, 2/3 of the product lines those companies produce are unhealthy, using a key metric. So everyone has a responsibility to act more actively for the planet. Businesses, governments, and consumers. Consumers need to make more noise. Where's the Extinction Rebellion around healthy and unhealthy food? It's not there. Everyone needs to make more noise.
And what about the analogy of meat with coal and oil, i.e. products which in our effort to decarbonize by 2050 need to be one way or another removed from our economic and food production system?
I think every industrial production process in the food system needs to be looked at very carefully in terms of a number of scientific metric outcomes, whether it's carbon emissions, animal welfare, human health, the risk of zoonoses transmission, whatever it is, every one of them has to be looked at very carefully. I think it's a bit dangerous to single one out because then you forget all the others. So I'm looking for holistic planning and strategy.
Schengen Fan, I'm intrigued to know, and Brent, I see your hand up. I will get to you in a minute, but Schengen Fan, I'm intrigued to know how this debate sounds viewed from China, because I'm very mindful that when it comes to the much broader climate change debate of the last couple of decades, China and other governments in the developing world have deeply resented the way in which the industrialized world, having filled the atmosphere with greenhouse gases for 150 years, then turns round to the developing economies and says, oh, by the way, guys, you need now to accept, very strict controls on the amount of carbon and greenhouse gases you can emit because of all the damage we have done in the past. And that is going to obviously affect the degree to which you can industrialize in the way we did. There is I think it's fair to say, a degree of resentment in countries such as China about the way that argument has played out. Do you feel the same resentment when it comes to a specific discussion about healthy food, about changing dietary habits, about the questions being asked in China at the moment of whether it's right for the Chinese population to embrace meat eating and particularly sort of beef eating in a way which may well be difficult for greenhouse gas emissions, but which may suit the Chinese desire to enjoy a diet which Westerners have enjoyed for many, many decades. Is there a resentment there or not?
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. First, let me come back to your first question, the relationship between nutrition and hunger. I think, you don't need to solve the hunger first. Then you can think of nutrition. Using my experience back in China, more than 50 years ago in my small village, we were struggling to get enough food. We eat almost 1 kilogram of rice a day just to fill our stomach. I wish we could have more knowledge about nutrition. We don't need to eat 1 kg of rice. We can, just probably half kg of rice and some fish, vegetables, which are pretty cheap and available. But we didn't know these things, are actually good for our health. We thought the rice is everything. Rice will make us strong. Rice will make us smart. So that was a problem 50 years ago. So I just let you know that we can tackle hunger and the nutrition problem at the same time. Now, coming back to your question, whether the Chinese are resentment to some of the, let's say, the challenges by Western to China. Actually, Steve, it's not. So recently, the Chinese government has committed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. That's because China recognized that well, if we don't work together, regardless who made this scene before, but if we don't work together, our planet will be warmer, climate will change. This will affect everybody. So carbon neutrality by 2060 is a big target, a big goal. And as a researcher in China, we are analyzing various options, particularly in food and agriculture, how food and agriculture can contribute to carbon neutrality by 2060. Now, you were talking about the meat consumption here in China. Meat consumption here in China is not as high as US, maybe half or maybe even 1/3. But we do recognize that too much meat consumption is not good for our health. Lots of non-communicable diseases, heart diseases, diabetes, and even certain cancers. We recognize that. We don't need to follow Western diets. I think they made a mistake. Why we should follow them? So I think this is a common recognition here in China. We don't need to follow Western style diets. We can change it before it becomes too late. And we're also committed to make sure that when we eat, yes, we do think of our health, nutrition, but we also think about our environment, carbon neutrality. So this message has been translated into social media, into almost everybody in the society. So I think you were talking about youth. I think youth is particularly excited about this opportunity.
But if that's very
human and environmental health.
But then what's going wrong? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen figures which suggest that while 50 years ago, China had a real massive hunger problem with tens, if not, well, hundreds of millions of people going hungry in China 50 years ago. Today, you've basically eliminated hunger, so you've delivered, food at scale right across your huge country. But the problem now is you have a rising obesity problem, just as we do in the West. You have too many obese people in China. So if you're right and the Chinese population is ready to listen to arguments about healthy food, why do you have dangerous numbers of obese people in China?
Yeah, firstly, by 2020, China basically ended poverty. When you end poverty, basically you make sure that everybody has affordability and accessibility to food, to feed your stomach, because the poverty line is defined by a certain amount of money you can purchase enough food plus something else. So that problem is gone. So hunger definitely is gone. Yes, obesity and overweight are rising, but don't forget there's a time lag. This problem happened probably 10 years ago. People begin to eat more, begin to relax, don't do much exercise. So now the whole society begin to recognize that. So the nutrition guideline of 2016 definitely recognized that problem. But now the new guideline will be released this year, 2021, and you will see a tremendous change to really advise people to have healthy, nutritious, and hopefully sustainable diets for themselves and for the society. So it's changing, but it will take some time.
Barry, I want to come back to you. You study this from a sort of, a commercial point of view. There's a big debate in the delivering nutritious food at scale about the most effective and efficient sort of scale in which to think. Should this be an issue which we hope to solve on a regional basis, i.e. as local as possible? Should it be about nation states, or should it be about globalization and vast transfers of food around the world in a globalized system? What is the best way, looking through the next decades, to think about delivering nutritious food at scale? Local, national, or globalized?
Well, I have a very clear opinion on this. What is really lacking is that we don't have the true pricing of the food that we produce. So because we have not priced nature in the food that we eat, and nature also representing the nutrition which is in the food, we make the wrong decisions. So for me, if you would price nature in food, so that you also have to include how many kilometers they have to travel to get to the destination, you completely changed the value chains, right? So you are talking about meat. One of the things is meat. Red meat is one of the most subsidized foods that we have because we don't put the right price of how much nature is being consumed in that meat. So if you are suddenly, because of meat being so impactful, you will treble or quadruple the price, suddenly you will change a lot of shift. We know that that happens. Some time ago in the US, red meat was very expensive and poultry meat had a different price, and you saw a big shift, a lower price, big shift of consumption there. So my view here is about, so your question is, how long should this value change be? It all depends. If a country X is much better in producing certain foods that is needed to complete the diet of a country somewhere else, and they can do it more efficiently from an environmental point of view and from a nutritional point of view, then you should shift the product. If you can't, then you should not do it. And you should first try to look at it close to your home. So there are a lot of alternative foods that we can produce in the regions that we are. 100 years ago, people were also fed, and they needed to take their food coming very far, from very far. So my view is very simple. We need to look at the places where it makes sense from an environmental impact and from a nutritional point of view to produce and then transport, but not just by definition think that we should do have very long value chains. I don't agree with that, but you will have some foods that make a lot of sense to transport them from far because they're more efficient to be produced there. And let me tell you, I really truly believe that if we don't put a price on carbon, if we don't put a price on water, only those two already represent most probably 80% of all environmental impact on the produced products we consume. And if we don't put also a price on social impact, because that's also very important, we will never solve this problem because we will continue to be subsidizing nutritious food around the world.
Right, but the truth is people have been talking about putting a genuine price on carbon and on emissions across all economic sectors for decades now, and it still doesn't really happen because politicians are too frightened of the consequences, because in some cases it'll mean much higher prices on a whole host of things, including food products. Politicians don't like to tell their populations that kind of thing.
But it's reality. We are our planet, we are in reserve time, right? So we don't have time anymore, but we need to feed everybody. It's unacceptable that people have hunger in this world of today. But it's also unacceptable that we can produce food within our boundaries, but we don't do it just because we are not willing to get the proper framework in place. I think that's why I hope that in the food summit that is coming, that we are able to agree on a framework how to do this.
All right. Lawrence and then Brent, I want you to paint a picture for me of the supermarket of the future, not the distant future of hundreds of years away, but let's say the supermarket of 10 years from now. Should we all, wherever we are in the world, be expecting to walk into our local food shop and have much less choice than we have now? Less choice in the sense that we're not getting all of these different foods from all over the world shipped to us on our doorstep, because as we've just heard from Berry, that oftentimes doesn't make much sense in terms of sustainability. So maybe we need to be consumers who are prepared to accept less choice and in some cases much higher prices for certain foodstuffs which are extremely unsustainable. And you know, we might be thinking now about red meat and industrialized production of red meat. Is that the future of the food shop that we all need to accept, Lawrence?
Well, another tough question. I mean, it kind of depends where you are in the world, I think. In the high-income countries, I think you're going to see smaller supermarkets that are closer to where people live. You might see fewer choices in terms of all year round seasonally available produce, but you might have more choice in the sense of where your food comes from, the carbon footprint it generates. You'll know about that. You'll know more about the provenance of food. So you have different choices. You know, the true cost of food, full cost pricing that Barry was talking about is really important, and I really agree with him. But studies that have shown, and Brent's been involved in some of these studies, that for high-income consumers, the prices will actually be the same or lower. It's in the lower-income countries where the food prices will be going up, and there you have this principle of the climate inequity, the issue that you alluded to earlier, of, hey, you've been eating meat for years now in the West. Let me eat my meat in peace in Africa and Asia and Latin America. So there's going to have to be some kind of redress from high income to low income countries to allow low income consumers to ride out that price spike that will happen when we go to true cost pricing. So there is a big inequality issue here, and a big it's like in the climate world, there's a differentiated responsibilities component to this. So very important. But the supermarket of the future, as I said, will be smaller, will be closer to where people live. And actually, for most people on low income, they don't go to supermarkets. They go to informal markets. And those informal markets are served by small and medium businesses. And those are the businesses that are always overlooked when it comes to investment, loans, and business development technical assistance. Those are the backbone of food systems in low-income contexts, and those are the businesses we need to be supporting, because they get fresh food to people who have very little money.
Brent, I want you to take on the same question, and in particular that thought from Lawrence about the need for, well, let's put it frankly, the rich world to support the poor world in food transition. Is that the remotest of possibilities, real support and collaboration and cooperation between rich world and poorer world?
Yeah, Stephen, there are a number of things to unpack here. First, I want to describe the supermarket of the future. And, I hope that it's not a supermarket that's filled with junk food like it is today. I mean, when you walk into a supermarket, it's so much easier to buy a bag of chips and candy and Coca-Cola than it is to find healthy food, right? So, if in my head, if I could describe that supermarket and what it looks like, it would really be one where you walk in and healthy food is accessible, it's affordable, it makes sense, you can see what your environmental impact is on that food, irregardless of where that comes from. Now, on your question about local, national, globalized food systems, I've got a bit of a different perspective on it, because I think every single type of system is needed. We need local food, we need national food, we also need a globalized food system, because at the end of the day, we live in a global food system. And we're not going to be able to get around the fact that we're going to have to trade food, we're going to have to cooperate, and we're going to have to figure out where it's best to grow certain types of food. And that might mean shipping an avocado from Chile to Sweden, right? And if the transport sector does actually decarbonize, then the environmental impact will be pretty low. But we get into these heated debates where we want to pit one side versus the other, and we want to say it's all about local food or it's all about global food. And I heard it in that, industrial agriculture question. Should we get rid of industrial agriculture? And I don't believe, we should. Everything needs to be looked at, but we shouldn't vilify and say industrial agriculture is automatically bad and, local food is good, because it's not that simple. Everything needs to be looked at, but if we're going to figure out how to feed 10 billion people in the future, all options have to be considered. As long as they have low environmental impacts and also provide healthy food.
Yeah, actually, Schengen, before I bring you back in, just on that, you talked about the avocados and the trade in avocados between Chile and Sweden. Are we ever going to get to a point in our world where we say to the people of Sweden, sorry, you can't eat avocados. They're not local to you. It's ridiculous to be spending all of this carbon on growing them and then shipping them right across the world so you can enjoy your smashed avocado and egg in a Stockholm fancy restaurant. You're not going to have it in the future. There's loads of healthy food you can eat, but avocados isn't part of it.
Yeah, but to ship that avocado from Chile, the overall greenhouse gas emissions impact is quite low. And what I find to be frustrating is that you'll get individuals that will drive their big SUV to the supermarket to pick up that, but they won't pick up the avocado because the avocado has a high greenhouse gas emissions impact, but driving their car has actually a higher impact. I would be surprised if a lot of people will want to restrict choice like that, and I think that we can come up with a way of being able to still enjoy our avocado on smashed toast or however you want to eat it, and reduce the impact of that. And that could mean growing it in Chile.
Right. Sorry, Schengen fan, avocados distracted me for just a moment, but I know you had your hand up, so make the point you wanted to make.
Yeah, I think, you know, well, Steve, you were asking about a supermarket in 5 years, even 10 years. I think in 10 years, lots of supermarkets will be virtual. The people already begin to order their food online. So they deliver your fresh food, whether it's milk, whether it's vegetables, fruits, to your doorsteps. You don't need to go out. That has implication on our environment, health, and nutrition. I mean, good or bad. For example, the negative side is a lot of young people order their takeaways or carry out foods, right, from restaurants, and lots of sugar, and lots of fat, and lots of salt. How can we regulate that? So that's one problem. Now, in terms of fresh produce, that's probably the positive side, because you can order your fresh foods maybe 2 or 3 days ahead of you. So then they, you know, they produce either locally or somewhere in a warehouse, and fresh, maybe nutritious, healthy from that side. So we needed to look at all these modern technologies, modern options. We can really design our options strategy for the next 10 years, not for yesterday.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I'm going to turn away from my questioning for just a moment, and I did encourage everybody to send thoughts and questions through the platform or through Twitter to me, and they will come out, believe me, in terms of my screen and putting them then to the panel. So I've got one here which is guided towards Berry, but others can join in if they want to. But the question is simply, if we implement the true cost, the true price of different foodstuffs, how will those on low incomes afford them? Should we, as part of this whole debate, be talking about raising the minimum wage or introducing the concept of a standardized living wage, universal wage for people around the world, so that we know that consumers can afford the foodstuffs that have been priced to reflect their true cost to the planet? Berry, you start.
Well, thank you. Look, in my opening statement, I said that there is no size fits all, remember? But I do think that the starting point has to be that you need to know the price. We can, as society, decide that in certain regions, we will say, okay, there is a nature subsidy, but then we have to compensate it somewhere else. The reality is we need to reduce 12 gigatons of emissions in the food production in the coming years. And where it's coming from the right or the left, we will need to do it, because otherwise we will not survive on this planet. So I'm for, and that's what I said also, we need to look at the true pricing from water, carbon, and social. So I do think that this social part is also extremely important, that we will have to accept that in certain regions, you have to think about the social consequence of this. And that's where I'm looking at, okay, if you look at New York, if you would issue today a bond in New York, and only so this is a social bond because it's going to be supporting a social development in a region that needs food, there is no market for it. So in my view, I mean, we need to completely change the thing, right? So that's what I was trying to say. You need to have the due pricing, because you're also kidding yourself as well if you are trying to sell product under the price of its impact. But then let's be conscious about it. Let's come together and subsidize then that specific country, that specific region that needs to have that access. But today the reality is that we are consuming, and I'm consuming also. I'm also to that. I changed my patterns. I'm a Brazilian, so I used to eat meat 7 days a week. I'm not back to only 2 days a week. We have to change our pattern so that there is more room for others to eat. So I'm truly believer in that there should be environment, water, carbon, but also social bonds, so that we can let's say amortize or at least absorb the shock of those change and the system change that we need to look at. We have to do it with the eyes wide open. We are now kidding ourselves.
I'm very mindful, as I'm sure you guys are as well, that it's a real shame that Mai Tin Yuman, who represents, she's an activist with indigenous communities in Myanmar, cannot be with us, because I'm looking at the picture of Mai Tin on the screen, wishing she could join in, because her perspective is a very important one, that of indigenous peoples, people, really wedded to a rich local culture, which would include, the culture of food, because food isn't just what we put in our bellies to survive. It's also, richly resonant of our cultures and our histories. And I'm just wondering, whether you guys, all in your different ways, part of quote unquote the global elite, you're highly educated, you travel the world, you sit in think tanks and NGOs, and your perspective is truly international. When you're considering these issues of accessibility to healthy food to communities right around the world, do you think that the perspective of, for example, indigenous communities who aren't wired into this global network, do those people's interests really get listened to and taken account of in debates like this? Anybody, go for it.
Because we are working on something that are very relevant to what you said, Steve. So here we have a national Chinese dietary guideline. Now we're in a process of developing different dietary guidelines that can fit into different cultures, different regions. For example, I come from southeast part of China. We have a traditional diet, which is actually quite healthy, and lots of fruits, and lots of vegetables, and lots of fish. But today, all these are gone. So can we come back to our roots, the culturally sort of rich diets, but in the meantime, we can really add health, nutrition, and sustainable into that. So I think next step is how can we develop culturally acceptable, affordable diets for different kinds of people, and in different locations, different, let's say, even different tribes. I think coming back to the question on rising food prices because of the proper pricing, I think here the technologies come in. There are technologies that can produce healthy, nutritious foods by increasing productivity, so lower the prices, so that the people will be able to afford healthy, nutritious diets. So innovation technologies here are very important. Now, obviously, towards the end of the day, it's your income. So if you can increase your income to $5 a day, $10 a day, then you will be able to afford healthy, nutritious diets developed by Lancet, Brent and myself were involved. So I think towards the end of the day, social protection, jobs for low-income people are the solution to solve the affordability and accessibility problem.
Thank you, Shengen Fan. And Brent, I think you were going to come in on the question about whether the voices of some people in this debate, and I was thinking particularly of indigenous communities, people less wired into the sort of international arena, whether they get really listened to and that their voice gets heard.
Yeah, and I would say it's an absolute resounding no. I lived in Borneo for 5 years with the Dayak, and really studying their culture and learning about them and just a rich history that they have. And it's all directly, it comes back to food, and food is front and center of so many of the traditions that they have, and they were not listened to. And one of the things that we worked on was how do we bring and get them at the table to have some of these conversations, and I think all of us will say when we're having many of these Skype meetings, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a Skype meeting or like, I don't know, some kind of seminar or webinar, we tend to talk to the same people.
Right.
And it tends to be a bit of an echo chamber, right? And we say kind of the same things. We've got our talking points, and we don't have that different perspective coming in and pushing us. We don't have the ranchers from South Dakota coming in and saying, but you're saying shifting diets, but what about us? My perspective is this, and I'm worried that I'm going to lose my job. Or we don't have marginalized community. We don't have people of color. We don't have indigenous people at the table. And I think that we will fail in this effort if we don't have more people giving their perspectives. And also, it's not only giving your perspectives, but if we're open to be able to listen to them, and really open to be able to sit down and hear what they're saying and meet them halfway. And I think we have a long way to go there. I think we're making strides, but it's something that we have to address very, very quickly.
Yeah, well put. Lawrence, do you want to join in on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Shengen and Brent on this. I would also say it's a resounding no. But we're trying. It's difficult, but we're trying. I think it's a shame, because I think indigenous people, not only do indigenous people lose out from not having a seat at the table, their own issues, but everybody loses out, because their knowledge and their wisdom, it needs to be married with the more objective, supposedly objective scientific knowledge. It's that fusion of experiential, tacit, and scientific that really gives you powerful, credible, legitimate knowledge. There are so many indigenous crops that are highly nutritious, incredibly affordable, and add to biodiversity, but they've just been forgotten about. They've become, unglamorous and neglected, and no one wants to consume them anymore. So I'm hopeful that a new generation of entrepreneurs will be drawn to these crops and this knowledge and these communities to try to generate wealth for them and better nutrition and better environmental outcomes for everybody. But if you don't actively include these communities in the discussion, you are actively excluding them, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to break off from my questioning again just for a minute because we've got a question that's come in from the audience. It's a specific but interesting question about the economics of food, and it touches on things that we've already discussed, but it's a very specific question, and it is it time to stop relying on voluntary action by big food companies and just use government enforcement action to, for example, ban ads for high sugar foods, put a serious sugar tax in place, take other measures to try to, in a sense, force consumers to make healthier choices in what they put into their mouths? Government action, does it in the end have to be the answer? What are we saying? Yeah, Lawrence, hands up, go on.
I'm happy to go on to kick off on this. I mean, I'm a big believer in carrots and sticks on this. If you want businesses to behave in a certain way, their argument will be, if we're not breaking the law, leave us alone. We do what consumers want us to do, and we're responding to their incentives. Now, I think that's a disingenuous argument because lots of businesses shape those preferences and skirt on the edge of the law. So I think governments need to be much more courageous and much more accountable for their actions, and they need to be much tougher on the businesses that behave badly, but they also need to incentivize businesses to do good things. So I personally believe that the junk food that is advertised to our kids, and I've got a couple of teenagers myself, there should be bans on certain types of foods at certain times of the day, and they should be global bans, and they should be in all kinds of media, not just TVs, but video games, and a whole range of social media. Influencers are big peddlers of junk food. So I think that you need that. I think sugar taxes are very important, but you also need subsidies to companies that are trying to do the right thing. If you want companies to produce more nutritious food, help those companies get access to finance. If you want them to develop more nutritious food, set up processing zones for nutritious food companies where you have lower rates, lower utility bills, and so on and so forth. So you can incentivize companies to do the right thing in a voluntary way with carrots. And if they don't do the right thing, they need to be held accountable, it seems to me. But governments are very scared to do this. They're worried about driving businesses away. They're worried about losing jobs and tax revenues from their constituencies and from their cities and their rural areas. And even when they are determined to fight it, they don't have the resources to fight it. It's almost like you need some kind of a legal defense fund for low-income countries to fight big corporations who are going to take them on. Over.
Yeah, Schengen Fan, I'm sorry, Brent, I'm just going to go to Schengen. Obviously, China is a different political culture from, say, the Western nations that most of us are speaking from today. But I'm very intrigued to know in China, what stance does the government take in terms of using, coercive powers to intervene in the sort of food industry and ensure that, generally speaking, your population is encouraged to make healthier choices?
Yeah, well, I think that obviously government sets big targets, big vision. For example, health a Healthy China 2030 sets a lot of health indicators for China to achieve. There are 10 strategies. The second strategy is about the diets, healthy diets. So, which is a big thing. Healthy China strategy has a diets in it, and I think that has lots of policy strategies to make sure that the knowledge information will be disseminated to general citizens, and certain regulations will be introduced to guide, to regulate the private sector. So right now, the private sector is still an issue right now. I have to say that they don't have much either carrots and sticks from the government to do the right thing. But I guess in the next 5 to 10 years, if we wanted to achieve all these indicators in the Healthy China 2030, then the private sector must change their behavior, must be held accountable. And I think the whole society can make sure that these private big companies will be responsible to what they are doing in terms of general citizens' health and nutrition. So, yes, it's rising, but lots of things to do at this moment.
All right, yeah, I'll bring Brent in because he had his hand up earlier, and then Barry, I'll come to you. So.
Yeah, I know this notion of if government intervention is needed. I mean, absolutely. But like Lawrence pointed out, a lot of governments are hesitant to be able to come in on this issue because it's a tricky one. I mean, who wants to have like say that we're going to have a sin tax on food? But what worries me a bit is that what ends up happening is that we tend to rely on things like education campaigns, awareness campaigns, and more of the soft policy tools, which take a long time to create real social change at the scale and pace that we actually need. So, we need both. We need the top down and we need the bottom up, but we also have to be very careful that we don't just rely upon the bottom up because it's much less controversial than implementing more of the top down measures.
And Barry, we've talked about in the last few minutes about carrots and in particular sticks being wielded by governments around the world to change consumers' behavior and patterns of food consumption. But you guys in the private sector surely have a role to play too. I mean, you're a bank that provides investment capital to business. I don't know how much work Rabobank does with the food industry and the agricultural sector, but basically you could make investment decisions that are much more, frankly, based upon responsibility. I don't know whether you're in your bank nowadays look very skeptically at investing in fossil fuel industries, but you could look very skeptically at investing in food manufacturers who sell junk food and sugar-based products to people around the world. Would you do that? Is that now part of the thinking in your bank?
Well, look, just some of the figures, right? So Rabobank today is financing globally on the food and agri sector. So the food and the ag companies, something like 120 billion euros. So it's a big business for us globally. But more importantly, I think we are fully committed in that transition. So what we have started right now, we have started to have a picture, a photo of all our clients from the farmers to the large companies of how they are committed to this transition. And we have been training our account managers to have this engagement with the clients, to have this discussion. The view of the bank is we need at this moment to go together with our clients to get into a transition. But there is a moment that you're not talking anymore. You really have to show that you have taking action. So that's the way we are doing it right now. So at this moment, we are still in the, let's say, okay, what are you doing? What are you transitioning? Are you walking? Are you getting better? Are you taking your responsibility? And we already have some sectors that we have decided not to grow anymore or even to reduce. And I come from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands today, there's a huge debate about the amount of animals that we should have on land, and we are fully in that discussion. So there is no way that if we want to transition, we as a bank will have a big role in that. So I fully underwrite that. Two things that I would like to go back also. One is also that you have to support let's say, the emerging markets on mid-sized companies, etc., where Lawrence talked to. So we have decided also to make major investments in banks in Africa and Latin America that can support those mid-sized. So today, most probably together, we are one of the biggest investors in Africa in the banking industry, but especially in local banks so that they can develop account management, they can develop saving deposits so that we can help that transition. But on the point that you asked me, what do you really think? Yes, and the carrot and sticks. To be sure, I think that that's right, carrot and sticks, but also information. So we were talking about in the beginning about the young people, the hackathons. If you ask them, they don't have the information to take the right decision. So my view also, the change also has to come through the consumer. The regulator, the governments should have a better labeling system so that we can compare what is the impact. I think today you are talking about the supermarket of the future, or be it online or physical. If you today walk into a supermarket, Stephen, you will not know what product has a bigger impact or a lesser impact on the environment if you're doing the right decision. So in my view, labeling is an easy thing that we should be quickly, government should regulate, in my view.
Okay, thank you guys. We have about 10 minutes left, and there's one question been brought up by the audience that I'm very keen to get to, because it perhaps is an implied criticism of me, and I'm more than happy to take it on, because the question is, there's been a lot of theoretical big picture discussion on this stage. So what one very specific concrete policy action would each of your panelists like to see implemented today on this question of delivering healthy food at scale right around the world? So there you are. I'm too keen on theoretical big picture blather. The person in our audience wants us to get to concrete specific policy proposals, and I need one from each of you. So we'll go around the screen. We'll start with you, Schengen.
Yeah, I think Lawrence already hinted. That is the reform of subsidies, or repurpose of subsidies. We need to keep all these subsidies in food and agriculture sector. So we are spending $600 billion a year on subsidies. So can we reform them to use this subsidy to support the production of nutritious, healthy, and sustainable foods? And here in China, we are really looking for, let's say, working with the government to change that policy. So some progress has been made. I think more needs to be done to make sure that that money is going to be used to support smallholders, to support researchers or scientists, to support the private sector, to transform what they have been doing before to achieve healthy, nutritious, and a sustainable food system for the whole society, so not just for them. And that will have the carrots for these companies, for the private sector, for the smallholders, for researchers to pursue towards the right direction.
All right, I'm just going to shift to my left on the screens, and that takes me directly to Berry. So Berry, concrete and specific proposal, please.
Make carbon tradable at the Chicago Board Trade. Like we do soya beans, we should be able to have contracts of carbon, future contracts, etc. So because then we have a price on what in my view is the big issue right now, is that we just have no price on nature.
Right, but how would that work in practice? Because we're talking about food here. So how would that impact the food production and distribution systems around the world?
Well, because food, there is a huge impact of greenhouse emissions on food. Food has 12 gigatons of emissions, and if we don't do nothing, it could double. And this has to go down to zero. So if we don't do that, there is no way that you will reach your targets. It's extremely important that there is a price on it. So if you want to transport soya beans from Brazil to China and you don't add the let's say the mile cost to it, then you'll never have the true pricing. And that goes all through the carbon emissions. And that's my view. So if you need 10 times more carbon to produce a steak, so be it. But if there is a price on it, we can put the right price on the beef, on the steak. If you only need 1 carbon to produce a good fish, then let it be 10 times more cheaper than red meat.
Right, but you want that to be a global pricing of carbon into food and food trade on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely?
Well, I don't know if it's 1 to 10, but there's no standard contract, Stephen. There's no standard contract for trading carbon. It's all, although carbon is a thing that travels around the world.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is we want concrete specific proposals, and you've just come up with something which I can totally understand would transform the global food system, but it's totally unlikely to happen in any foreseeable future. So what use is that?
Well, I don't think so. A carbon is a carbon. I can measure it.
No, I know.
So
but the fact of the world community agreeing to put that into the price of foodstuffs is highly unlikely.
Well, then we have a different opinion here. If you don't do it, you will not find a solution.
Ah, good. Well, I mean, I hope you're right. Let us see what the next 5 and 10 years bring.
We will work on it.
Yeah, all right. Brent, over to you.
Yeah, I think, we want magic bullets. We want to find that one solution that's going to transform everything, but it's really context dependent. And I'm going to take a bit of a different approach here and talk about what the individual can do. Because I think everybody listening here can, really struggles with what they can do to make the world a better place. When I worked in Borneo, people would often ask me, what can I do to save rainforest? What can I do to save these charismatic species? And I often struggled to answer their question about what somebody sitting in Canada or the US or Europe could do besides flying to Borneo and actually working on the ground. And I think each one of us probably tries to figure out how what impact can I have, one individual? And this is where diets come in. I would say if there's one thing that the people watching this could do today is to change your diet and to eat and shift towards more of a diet that doesn't focus as much on meat. And that's the great thing about food is it gives us agency. It gives us control over our lives to be able to actually make those choices. So, and it might be the single greatest action that you could actually take. So that's very, very specific. For your next meal, think about what you're eating and think that maybe eat a bit more plants in it.
Yeah, that is very specific, and it puts the onus of responsibility on all of us. So I thank you for that. So Lawrence, you're bringing up the rear here. You're going to give us your last concrete thought.
Yeah, it's difficult to think of one thing because we work, we call them food systems for a reason. Everything is connected to everything else. But since you've asked me, 3 billion people on the planet can't afford a healthy diet. That's what the UN tells us. 75% of Africans cannot afford a healthy diet. Small and medium enterprises in the food sector are the backbone of the food system in sub-Saharan Africa. They produce a lot of the nutritious food. They get it to the market. They keep it safe. They keep it from spoiling. And they make it look attractive. But that sector, that segment of businesses find it very hard to get the kind of finance that Rabobank and others provide. They're too small for that, and they're too big for microfinance. So they're stuck in this missing middle, this desert of finance. The SMEs have been able to, small and medium enterprises, we've been able to reach them in the energy space with dedicated impact investing funds, but we haven't been able to do that in the nutritious food space. So if you're a small and medium enterprise, maybe you employ 5 to 20 people, and you're supplying vegetables to local markets for people domestically to consume, and you want to expand your profit margins to create more opportunities for farmers, but also get food at a lower price to consumers, you're going to have to be able to purchase inputs at a lower price, and that means finance. And if they can't get access to finance, they can't expand and they can't provide lower prices to consumers and better prices to farmers. They just can't do it. So there's a missing financial institution, missing impact investing funds for small and medium enterprises that produce nutritious, healthy, whole food. That's what needs to be filled.
And again, that was concrete and specific. So I thank you all for your responses to that question, and indeed for the whole panel. It's lasted for more than an hour. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, all of you, for engaging. So Schengen Fan and Berry and Brent and Lawrence, thank you very much indeed. I only wish our female member, panel member, had been able to join us. So I'm thinking also of Maitin Yuman in Myanmar. I'm so sorry that she wasn't able to be with us. I'm sure she is very sorry too, but it was circumstances beyond her control. Panelists, thank you so much. Mark, we are looking forward to a short break, I think, in a minute, and then we're back with more. But you tell us what we can expect next.
Well, I certainly will, Stephen. Really great panel discussion that I think, I mean, this healthy diets for all grows to really the heart of what food system renewal and reform is going to be about. And it was good to get to some of the more tangible solutions at the end. And, you know, I think that the interventions that we had on subsidy reform, on access to finance are part of it. And actually what Barry said about the carbon price, I know you pushed him a little bit on that. We started actually month of March program with a discussion about natural capital accounting. And it does seem to me, at least, that that's something we are going to have to find a way through from a global governance point of view.
I hope my skepticism is misplaced. Let us see.
Well, skepticism is always helpful in terms of keeping our feet on the ground, as we know. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for moderating that panel again. As you said, really shame that Maitin couldn't join us. What we are going to do, though, is follow up with her and capture her contribution to that panel session, so we'll be able to play that back in the future. Well, the other thing that was in that panel session that struck me was what Brent said, actually, in terms of individual responsibility and the journeys that we can go on to make a difference. And one of the great things about the Forum for the Future of Agriculture that I've had the privilege to experience over the years is just how many people are involved in trying to renew and reform the food and agriculture system. We all come at it from different perspectives, sometimes as individuals, sometimes as organizations. And so for our final part of this session before the break, it's really my great pleasure to introduce to you Eva Keretic, the singer-songwriter and food activist, who both in word and in song is going to share with us a little bit of her personal journey in terms of renewing the food and agriculture system and why she is so passionate about it. Hope you enjoy it.
I would like to start by thanking the FFA organizers, the participants, and everyone listening out there trying to reform our global food system for the sake of our environment. You might be asking yourself what I'm doing on the stage and here at this forum, and so I'm going to start with a little story. Now, for that story, I need to start with two facts. One, I'm not a scientist, and two, 50 is the new 50. Yeah, it's half a century. And it's actually really a great thing. When I hit this milestone a couple years ago, I celebrated with an album release and a concert, and I thought, do I really want to travel down the roads that I had up until then? Or do I want to venture off into uncharted territories? Now, little did I know that would lead me to become an advocate for sustainable food reform. A lot of people, when they hit midlife, they start to reflect about their lives. And I thought, wow, I had really created a type of a comfort zone, and I needed to plan an escape. Now, the comfort zone is essentially a place where you feel safe, familiar, you have a routine, and age isn't even a factor when it comes to the comfort zone. In that place, dopamine and serotonin are released into your brain, and you're left with this life is good mindset. Now, when you step out of your comfort zone, you're confronted with anxiety, fear, and stress. And in that place, adrenaline is released into your brain. In the right dose, that can actually heighten and stimulate your brain's growth. So the truth of the matter is, the best things happen when you're right outside of your safety zone. So back in 1908, Robert M. Yerkes and John D. Dotson did studies, and they found that for a relative state of comfort, you get a steady performance. But in order to maximize your performance, you need a relative state of anxiety, a place where your stress levels are a little bit higher. And they called this place optimal anxiety. So I was still trying to figure out what I could do to leave my comfort zone. I'd been a singer-songwriter for many years, played on many different stages with different bands, but I had never played on the streets. And I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. And then I thought, to make that unpredictability just a little bit more exciting, I would go to cities that I'd never been to before. There are, of course, many cities in Germany. And so I thought, okay, I'll do it alphabetically. I will go A to Z through Germany. And that was about my plan. Okay. There I was, driving into my A town, Ascheberg. The voices in my head saying, "What are you thinking? What are you doing?" I persisted, to find that there was no place to play in Ascheberg, no street pedestrian zone. And so I sat down on a bench by a lake, played through my set to random 5 people walking by. Naturally, from that town on, I thought, okay, I'm going to pick cities where there's a pedestrian zone. I started to choose to go on weekends when people were out. And I started to collect stories along the way. A, B, C, D, E. I'm in Elmshorn. It was a very cold day because my grand idea started at the end of fall. And there I was on a church, in front of a church in Elmshorn. And the cool thing about playing on the streets is that you get to observe the people in the city. And to the right-hand side, I saw a group of young men talking. They came over to me, and it turned out they were refugees. And one of them said, "When you started to sing, it went straight to my heart." And I thought, oh, that's a good idea for a song. And then from my left-hand side, an older man started coming towards me with something in his hand that he had bought at the €1 shop. And it turned out to be white fleece gloves. And he said, maybe if you cut the fingertips off, you might be a little bit warmer. And so, as songwriters tend to get inspired with things like this, I wrote a song. Past the bustling station, past the lit up stores, benches on the church square with bells and ringing no more. Huddled team with laughter, children chasing sounds, bags filled with things in a place that I found. I want to set down something straight from the heart, straight from the heart. Now they're a part of my heart, yeah, straight from the heart, straight from the heart. Now they're a part, oh yeah, a part of my heart. Naturally, from that point on, I was hoping that every city would have something special for me, some little act of human kindness. And I began to look forward to the weekends when I would go out. And even though I look forward to the experiences, I have to say that every time I stepped out of my comfort zone in every city, I had the same voice in my head saying, oh, what are you thinking? While driving, as a songwriter, we also tend to think about life and reflect. And here I was, midlife, going like, I had this motto for my 40s, and it was no expectations. Well, you cannot have any disappointments if you don't have expectations. But for my 50s, it wasn't really working anymore, and I'm on the road driving. I decided it was no regrets. And it sounds a little like this. If this day is my last somehow, and I managed up to now, I hope there'll be no regrets in me. If the song is the last I sing, then I hope I gave everything, and then
suddenly this is what I've done. This is who I am. This is me alone. This is who I am. This is.
So, I completed my A to Z through Germany. I wrote an album of songs, told a lot of stories, gave a concert, but it didn't end there. The next obvious progression was, of course, to do research into vertical farming and how I could create jobs for refugees. Yeah, makes sense. Little did I know that that decision would take me far, far outside of my comfort zone. I met Mark Buckley, who is a global food reformist, and he noticed my enthusiasm, asked me to join him on his mission with his projects. He introduced me to Al Gore and the Climate Reality Project. He took me to food and climate conferences around the world, and I was suddenly surrounded by all of these great people out there trying to make a difference in reforming our global food system, and I was very inspired. And then suddenly, I found myself at the COP25 in Madrid as part of the Food Systems Dialogue with David Nabarro. In a room filled with all kinds of experts and scientists, and I was partaking in finding solutions for our broken food systems, with a voice, of course, in my head saying, "What are you thinking?" But I'll tell you, at this point, this is what I'm thinking. As you are all aware, we need to take all aspects into consideration when thinking about the complexity of feeding our growing global population and feeding them with healthy food that is not damaging our environment. Our present farm-to-table reality is collectively causing the most damage to our planet. In order to make the biggest impact, we need now to reform the way we farm, produce, transport, consume, and dispose of food. The disturbing fact of the matter is that 70% of all of our freshwater resources go towards agriculture, and we have a 50% biodiversity loss in our freshwater systems. Half of all the habitable land on this planet is used for agriculture, and we already have 52% soil degradation through monocropping, tilling, pesticides. 80% of the deforestation on this planet comes from small-scale agriculture, and we have a 70% biodiversity loss on the planet so far. We also are contributing 29% of the greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere. And of those emissions, methane is the worst. Methane is created in landfills, in rice fields, and with our cattle production. And it's 80 times stronger at holding the heat in the atmosphere than CO2. When people ask me, "Oh gosh, it seems so hopeless," and they say, "What can I do?" I say, "Well, did you know that for 1 kilogram of red meat, we require 15,000 liters of water, and that's equivalent to 6 months of shower? So if you want to do something little, if you eat a little less red meat, you're doing something good for the planet." Now, being involved in all these doomsday scenarios, I decided to focus my energy on solutions, on innovations, on all of the new technologies out there that are so exciting because we actually can create already and build a climate resilient food system. If we accelerate the implementation of new technologies into a cohesive regenerative system, we can produce food without a carbon footprint. By creating a co-op of future food technologies, running it in a closed loop system with green energy, we can change the status quo. And by having this kind of a production, we can actually allow our farmers in the field to adopt regenerative practices, agroforestry, and with that give back to our biodiversity, our soil's health, and the health of our atmosphere. I'm now a member of the Innovation and Research Committee at the Hamburg Chamber of Commerce, and I've convinced a team there as well as some people from Project Together to work on making this vision a reality. By creating a future food campus in Hamburg where we could house vertical farming, biotech farming within a closed loop system run on green energy, we can produce food without a carbon footprint. And we can educate the people. We can offer up a transparency from biodiversity to bioreactors and spread the awareness through solutions. Now, the dream is big, I know, but business as usual is not an option. So looking back, I wasn't aware that my first moves out of my comfort zone would take me on this journey and land me on this stage. But I really feel that by putting my time and energy into something where I'm putting into positive reform and trying to spread the awareness and to reform our food systems, that I'm in the right place. As you know, all big revolutions require collective action. I would like to thank you and commend you for all the work that you're doing in this field. Together, we can really make a difference. So I'm going to leave you with one little bit of advice that I learned along the way, and that is this. It's really deep. Comfort. It's nice. Leaving the comfort zone can be extraordinary. Thank you.
Eva, thank you so much indeed for that inspirational personal journey that you have shared with us. As you said, it's about thinking outside the box and getting out of the comfort zone. And Brent said what small steps could be taken. Well, I think you've revealed what some of your steps that you've taken on the journey toward a more sustainable and resilient food and agriculture system, and takes us back really to where we began this afternoon session with that hackathon with the next generation of food system leaders who are also already stepping outside the box and sharing with us their thinking on how we can renew ourselves going forward. That video available on YouTube, as is the talk from Eva, will be going up on FFA TV immediately following our sessions. That brings to a close the first part of our afternoon at this annual conference. We will be back in about 40 minutes' time. Eva very kindly name-checked our next speaker, David Nabarro. He'll be talking about lessons to learn from the COVID crisis and what that means for the renewal of the food and agriculture system. And so for a final time today, and indeed during the month of March, you can step outside again into the exhibition space and connect with each other one last time. And we'll see you back here at 15 hours 40 Central European time. Bye for now.